The NHL is officially back as opening night games start on Tuesday, but for the Hurricanes, they still have to wait a couple more days as their home opener is on Thursday. However, we do have an opening night roster. What does it look like from the forwards, defense, and even the goaltenders? Well, we'll talk about all of that on a Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes.
Your Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everyday for making this your first listen of the day, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hawkers, also the co-host of the Surgecast. There's a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. Like I said at the top of the show, we're going to be talking about the opening night roster for the Carolina Hurricanes, kind of give my thoughts to the instant reaction of who made it, in terms of the 23-man roster, where is the team in terms of their cap space going into the season. Then we're going to look at possible forward lines, the defense, and also the goaltending when it comes to the Hurricanes. So the Hurricanes announced their roster probably right around that 5 o'clock deadline on Monday when teams are supposed to submit those opening night rosters. Of course, things can change between Monday afternoon and going into Thursday. So with the roster, it's still a little bit tentative of maybe, someone has to go through waivers or however it breaks down and stuff like that. But it could change between now and Thursday. But initially for the opening night roster, this is what we're looking at. So these are the forwards that were selected, 13 of them: Jordan Staal, Sebastian Aho, Logan Stankoven, Seth Jarvis, Nikolai Ehlers, William Carrier, Andrei Svechnikov, Jordan Martinook, Eric Robinson, Jackson Blake, Taylor Hall, Mark Jankowski, and then Jesperi Kotkaniemi. No real surprises there when it looks at the forward core, because that's mainly, it's outside of the new addition of Nikolai Ehlers. It's pretty much the entire crew from last year is back once again for the Hurricanes in terms of the forward core. Now, the hope is that William Carrier can be healthy all season because he did miss almost close to 40 games last year due to injury. So the hope is that Carrier does stay healthy this year. And, of course, now you get full seasons from Mark Jankowski and Logan Stankoven. So you're looking at a forward core that ended last year with the Carolina Hurricanes in the playoffs outside of, Ehlers, and it kind of just moves over to this season, and there you pretty much go. Obviously, there's some, key additions from, key guys that weren't there, anymore at the end of last season, Martin Hitchens, Jack Drury, all of them. But like I said, you still get, the additions of Stankoven, Ehlers, and Jankowski being on this opening night roster compared to what they were last year. So overall, no real surprises here as the forwards are basically the same, minus the addition of Ehlers that the Hurricanes got during the offseason. Now, looking at the defense, Shane Gostisbehere, Jalen Chatfield, Mike Riley, Keandre Miller, Alexander Nikishin, Sean Walker, and Jacob Slavin. Now, obviously, the additions of Alexander Nikishin coming over because he finally ended his contract in the KHL. So he comes over for his first opening for the Hurricanes and making his regular season NHL debut on opening night, which is pretty solid, all things considered, for the fact that that's your regular season debut game for the Hurricanes is opening night. It's going to be electric. I've been to a few. It's always a great night when you get the guys coming out one by one, you get the coaching staff, you get all the loud cheers and stuff like that. So it's definitely going to be an exciting night. So you get Alexander Nikishin and his first home opener for the Canes, and it's his regular season debut after debuting in the playoffs last year. Of course, Mike Riley, the Hurricanes, signed to a 1-year, $1.1 million. Been with a few teams. This is his first opening night with the Hurricanes and his first season overall with the team. So That's going to be exciting to see for him as well. Of course, if he's going to be in the starting lineup, who knows? But, it will be the fact that you get Mike O'Reilly as your seventh defenseman in some capacity. And then Keandre Miller, first opening night for the Hurricanes as well, as he was the big defensive addition for the team over the offseason as well, after doing that sign-in trade with the New York Rangers that did see Scott Morrow and a couple picks go back to the New York Rangers. So outside of, with the forwards, how you have Nikolai Ehlers making his first opening night with the Hurricanes, and then, of course, Jankowski and Stamkos get their first ones as well, but they were with the team last year. This is going to be where you get Nikisha for his first home opener with the team, and then, of course, Keandre Miller and Mike Riley, of course, is going to be their first. All three of those guys be their first full seasons with the team. Goaltending, not much different. You have Frederik Andersen, Brandon Bussey, and Peter Kochetkov. Now, you do have the two goalies of Andersen and Kochetkov coming back once again after they were the tandem last year. Same thing. Hopefully, Frederik Andersen stays healthy. Of course, he did have a minor knee surgery last year. All signs indicate that he's feeling the best he's been in a long time. Hopefully, he stays healthy and not miss over 30 games for the third consecutive season. Of course, can't blame the guy. Blood clotting issues 2 seasons ago. Nothing you can do about that. That's a medical emergency. And then a surgery for a knee that definitely needed to get some work done. And then we'll see how Pierre Kochetkov does this year. Hopefully, last year he did suffer a concussion, did miss a few games, so hopefully he stays in the net for the Hurricanes as well. The newest addition, of course, for goaltending, Brandon Bussey. Originally, the first graphic showed him wearing 30. Of course, we all know who wore 30 before for the Hurricanes, but then they dropped a second graphic showing him in 32. So once again, we have another 32 on the roster, and this time is for Brandon Bussey. After on Sunday, they claimed him off of waivers. And for that instance, it was more of an insurance policy in case Kane Primo got claimed off waivers, because they did put him on waivers for the purpose of being assigned to Chicago. Unfortunately, right at the deadline at 2 o'clock on Monday, news came out, Kane Primo did get claimed by the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he made their opening night rosters one of their 2 goaltenders. So, unfortunately, the case that you did lose Kane Primo after a great preseason. Everyone's really excited about him. No longer a Hurricane. Now he's a Toronto Maple Leaf. So that's why the Hurricanes had the insurance policy of going to claim Bussey off of waivers from the Florida Panthers in case of this happening. It did. Now the thing with Bussey is he has no NHL experience, because he was stuck with the Boston Bruins organization, where he just never saw any AHL time. Between Swayman, Allmark, now Corpusalo, and they brought Michael DiPietro up a lot, no relation to the other DiPietro who played for the Islanders back in the day. So Bussey really never got a chance to play any NHL games. Of course, he had a great career at Western Michigan in the NCAA, but also, 111 AHL games, goals against really good. And you guys heard me talk about him on the Monday show. So while he doesn't have the NHL experience, he can win games. He pretty much wins wherever he goes for the most part. Just had some inconsistent Bruins teams in Providence in front of him. So if he's your third goalie going into the future, because they're going to have to put him through waivers again, we'll see if he has to get claimed. But there's a third goalie. Bussey's not a bad one to have. So that's kind of what you're looking at in terms of your 3 goalies. Of course, like I said, between now when this airs on Tuesday compared to Thursday, stuff can definitely change in between then. But that's your opening roster. We got 13 forwards, 7 defensemen, and 3 goalies. So that's kind of what you're looking at right now for the Hurricanes. Obviously, like I said, subject to change, but that's kind of what you're looking at right now. Forward core, pretty much the same cast coming back from last year at the end of the season with the addition of Nikolai Ehlers. But, Jankowski and Stamkos get their first opening nights for the Hurricanes. Defense, you get Miller, you get Riley, you also get Alexander and Nikishin. So those guys are going to get their first opening minutes for the Hurricanes, of course, with Nikishin. It's his NHL debut. And then on the goaltending side, Brandon Bussey, only new addition for the Hurricanes in terms of the goaltending, as that stays the same. Now, talk about the forward core. What could the potential lines look like on opening night for the Canes? And also, how can we've pretty much known what they've looked like throughout camp? Well, stick around. We'll talk about it here in a second on a Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or diving into the stats, FanDuel makes game day experience so much better. If you're watching your actual team or if you're keeping an eye on your fantasy team, FanDuel gives you a little bit more to watch when it comes to their app. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. All right, so we kind of went over through the breakdown of the opening roster for the Carolina Hurricanes. We know what the forwards, the defense, the goaltending looks like, but past that, what could potential lines look like? And we're going to start with the forward core. Now, obviously, like I said, we went through it in the first segment. Same cast of characters coming back from last year with the addition of Nikolai Ehlers. For the most part, from what we've seen, and I think we've seen a lot through pretty much all of camp for the Canes, obviously, with some guys being in no contact jersey, some kind of probably missed some time, stuff like that, or, what have you, a little bit of shuffling around, but not a lot. But this is kind of what we saw at yesterday's practice on Monday. That's just because of the fact that you're still waiting for Kotkaniemi to officially get back. But I think there's that one small switch. So you had Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis, Svechnikov, Stankoven, Blake, Martin, Uxtal, Carrier, Hall, Jankowski, Robinson, with Kotkaniemi being the 13th forward. Now, the thing with this is the only small switch that would probably happen on Thursday night is you would put Kotkaniemi as the fourth line center compared to Jankowski, and I think that's what your lines will look like. I know one of the questions coming into the season was who was going to be the second line center, and of course we all heard, on Kane's corner, Rod Brind'Amour was asked about that. We see Seth Jarvis, he said most likely not. I like him on the wing better, and then you have that comparison with Martin Necas. Then they asked about Stankoven. He goes, we'll give him a look. We don't know how long that look is going to be because he said it also during the first few days of camp. We don't know if it's just going to be 1 or 2 practices. It could be longer. Who knows? In the end, Logan Stankoven was the second line center for pretty much all of training camp, and he was a center for the couple of preseason games that he was in. So in reality, when you look at the situation the Hurricanes are in, Stankoven has been the second line center pretty much all of camp, and I think that kind of solidifies that answer of, all right, what are we looking for here? Because if there was the caveat of them switching back and forth between Stankoven and Kotkaniemi to say, okay, how are both these guys looking at the second line center position? How are their wingers on their sides? Is it Blake and Svechnikov the whole time, or is it a little bit of a switch up? There was a small switch for a couple practices on the right side with Hall and Blake, but that lasted a very short amount of time. Other than that, that second line of Svechnikov, Stankoven, Blake has been pretty much together the whole time. So that gives the indication that I think Rod Brind'Amour and the Hurricanes already had something set, and they wanted to give it a long runway to see how this looks with those 3 guys as your second line behind the pretty much the locked-in top line of Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis. Like I said, if there was a switch off at center, I think we have a little bit more of a conversation of, okay, who could be the second line center? It seemed like that was already done and done for pretty much the whole time. Stankoven was second line center. Kotkaniemi never saw time in the top 6. And I think that's what you're looking at when you're looking at your set second line and pretty much your top 6 or the top 9. Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis obviously makes sense. You've got the 2 really fast guys and Sebastian Aho in the middle. And then you got, of course, the power forward and Andrei Svechnikov, Jackson Blake coming into his sophomore season with the Hurricanes. And, of course, Dave Covey, who the Hurricanes traded for last year in the Mikko Rantanen saga and gave him that 8-year extension. Then, of course, the Jordans with Martin Ocastal with William Carrier, who they really wanted on that third line all of last year. So, for me, that's your top 9. Your top 9 has pretty much been, for the most part, locked in the entire training camp. And it's interesting when you look at training camps with the Hurricanes is the fact that if you see the same lines pretty much consistently for multiple days, almost the full 2 weeks, you kind of get the indication that this is where the Hurricanes are leaning. Because we saw it last year, we saw it the season before. This is kind of the Hurricanes' MO of they really want to see how these lines look. And if they look good from the start and they go the whole way, 9 times out of 10, of course, there's those rare instances, these are going to be your lines to start the season. Of course, throughout the season, things are going to change because, there's going to be some, different strategies, or maybe guys are, maybe deserve a little more ice time. So there might be some rearrangements. So obviously expect that these lines aren't going to be the same the whole season. You would like to see some consistency with the lines. That way they can get a little bit more chemistry being built throughout the season. But, things tend to happen during the regular season where things change, where guys get injured, or maybe guys, start off a little bit hotter and they get more ice time. Maybe some guys are struggling and stuff like that. But for the most part, when you look at your forward core, that top 9 has pretty much been locked in right from the get-go. Obviously, Jankowski was in a no-contact jersey for a little bit during camp. Of course, later on, Kotkaniemi did get a stick to the face and eye area in one of the latest preseason games. So they're still waiting for him to be fully 100% to go, but he's expected to go. So expect probably that Hall, Kotkaniemi, Robinson fourth line, which is still pretty good, all things considered. I think it's a sneaky fourth line. You got the playmaking and scoring abilities of Taylor Hall. You got just Barrett Kotkaniemi, who's not really much of a goal scorer. He does score goals. He might get you about 12 to 13. The hope is 15 this year. But the thing is, he's someone who wins a lot of faceoffs. Ever since joining the Hurricanes, he is over 50%. So there's some credit to give to Jesperi, where, maybe the scoring isn't really there that you would hope for when he was a second-line center. But he gives you that defensive center mentality of, I'll get you some goals, but the main thing is trying to be a more defensive-minded center. Now it's just him using his body a little bit more. We saw him throw a little bit more hits last year compared to previous seasons. So I think he's trying to still develop into that defensive center role a little bit more, where, try to use the body, win board battles, win face-off, stuff like that. He has 150%, so he does have that going for him. He's got that nice trend going in that direction. Then, of course, you got Eric Robinson on the right side. Unreal speed, career year last year in terms of goals, assists, points. Early on, he was on fire because he was part of that line with, Kotkaniemi and Nietzsche, where those 3 were just absolutely just blowing the doors off of pretty much everyone at that point, and they were racking up points together. But Robinson did have a little bit of a slowdown, kind of saw the fourth line for pretty much the back half of the second year, but all things considered, I think he fits the Hurricane system well. That's why they gave him that 4-year contract. It makes sense. He definitely earned it. So he does still have that speed factor that can really help a fourth line that has a playmaker, a scorer in Hall. You got the defensive mindset of Kotkaniemi, who's going to win you some possessions and will score some goals as well. And, of course, Robinson does the same things, but you get his speed in. That could be an interesting fourth line to look for the Carolina Hurricanes, and kind of make teams wonder, okay, these guys could roll 4 lines pretty much every game outside of that. So it should definitely be interesting how that fourth line looks. And of course, Mark Jankowski, healthy extra in case someone gets hurt in terms of the centers, or maybe someone needs a break, he can, go be in that situation. So overall, there's your 13 forwards. I think this is what you're going to look like in terms of your opening night lines. Of course, things can definitely happen in the next couple of days. Well, you've seen from the outset, these are the lines that have pretty much been throughout training camp. And it should be interesting when they play the New Jersey Devils on Thursday. Now, we talk about the forwards, but what about the defense and the goalies? We'll stick around and we'll talk about it here in a second on a Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. Everyone's been in that spot where you need to hire someone, like I said, yesterday. The pressure's on, and every day without the right person is a setback. That's exactly when Indeed's sponsored jobs comes in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. So now you can speed up your hiring process with the $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, well, Indeed is all you need. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. All right, so we talked about the opening night roster in a broader term, talked about the forward lines. Now let's look at the defense and the goalies. Now, this is where it's going to get very interesting in terms of the Carolina Hurricanes, because we saw throughout all of training camp and through all the preseason games, this was never intact at all for the most part. Yes, very late on, you did get Slavin and Sheffield finally out of the no-contact sweaters. You got them kind of inserted into the lines and stuff like that. You know, Miller came back into, he was kind of in and out of it. But throughout pretty much all of camp, you never really saw your defensive core together as a group all at the same time. So this is kind of a nice, refreshing thing that, like, as the small amount of days lead up to the regular season, we see them finally together. We're kind of getting an idea of lines, or at least defensive pairings for the defensive side of things. So you got Slavin, Walker. Now, in course of practice, this was also Miller, Gostisbehere, Nikish, and Riley. Now, if we go into the regular season, you know, Jalen Chatfield back, it's going to be Slavin, Walker, Miller, Chatfield. Then you have Nikish and Gostisbehere and Mike Riley as your seventh. Now, in terms of Slavin, Walker, we saw it at the tail end of the playoffs last year. It kind of felt like you were getting a preview of what your potential top defensive pairing was going to look like for the Carolina Hurricanes, even before the addition of, you know, Nikish full-time and the addition of K'Andre Miller. I felt like this is what your potential top line was going to look like. It's a little bit more defensive because the fact that Sean Walker does score goals, but he's a two-way defenseman who leans defense a little bit more than his offense. So I think this is probably your shut-down defensive pair that that the Hurricanes want to imply. Because you've got some other defensive pairings that have a little bit more of offensive upside, maybe a good mix of the offense and the defense. But if you're looking for this is your defensive pairing that's going to go out there and shut down the best players in the league, I think Slavin Walker is probably going to be that pairing. Obviously, Jacob Slavin is the best defensive defenseman in the NHL. Sean Walker, for me, throughout as the whole season went on and even the playoffs, you saw him get better and better, getting a more understanding of the system. And Rod Brind'Amour said the same thing during the playoffs. When I asked him, and he's like, he was underrated, does what we ask of him. I think his, play in the playoffs got better as he went on. And I totally agree with that. So I think if you're looking at your shutdown defensive pair, is who's going to fit that role. It's going to be Slavin Walker. Now, looking at the second pairing, obviously you're going to have Miller, Chatfield. Now, this is going to be your very quick defensive pairing line because obviously both these guys have really good footwork, really good speed, good strides. They will both get back on the back check and stop opportunities from scoring. Now, Miller is going to be more of your offensive-minded defenseman, with Chatfield being more of your definitely your two-way guy because Chatfield can score goals. He won't put up a lot of goals, but he'll get you some goals. He'll get you a lot of great assists in the transition game, in rushes and stuff like that. But of course, his speed is going to help with the back checking. So he's probably not going to be pushed up as much as probably Miller would be, but you'll see Chatfield use his speed in both assets on going into the offensive zone and back checking the Hurricanes, and of course Miller get more of that offensive mindedness to his game. Of course, he's part of the second power play unit along with Sean Walker. But I think with both those guys together, I think it's a very good second defensive pairing where you got Miller learning from Chatfield, who I believe has probably put himself into a situation where he could be a top four defenseman on a lot of teams. And of course, someone to really lean on from Miller for Chatfield to kind of be that guy to teach him along the way. So I think it's a very good second defensive pairing. Then, of course, your third pair, it's going to be Nikish and Gostisbehere. I've kind of said throughout the preseason and training camp that if there's someone who you have to move to the right side to go on his offhand, because obviously with the Hurricanes you got 4 left-hand shots, 2 right-hand shots, who is the most likely to switch over to his offside? If you could do it with Slavin, obviously Slavin can do it because he's that good of a defenseman. That won't be an issue if they want to put Miller on the top pairing. But for me, it's like the most logical guy to do it with is Shane Gostisbehere. He's done it in the past before for other teams he's been with, Philly, Arizona, Detroit. It makes sense if the Hurricanes slide him over to the right side, leave Nikishin on the left, then you would have a Slavin, Miller, Nikishin left side, and then now you got Walker, Chatfield, Gostisbehere. Gostisbehere can do it. I don't think it's going to be an issue. Obviously, the minutes for those guys aren't going to be probably as high as probably like your top 4 pairings will be because you still got Nikish, you're still learning the system. Of course, this is his first full season with his first training camp, so there's still going to be a learning process. Maybe you're going to see some growing pains still, which is not a bad thing. I mean, he's 23, first full season in the NHL, still also, learning the language a little bit too, but nothing wrong with kind of still trying to ease him in for the most part, but still give him a proper amount of minutes. Of course, we'll see some power play time and stuff like that. But having him with Gostisbehere is a good guy to learn from in terms of learning the system, stuff like that. So that's kind of what your third pairing is going to look like. Goaltending, it's going to be, Kochekov and Anderson for the most part. I don't see Brandon Bussey really doing very much early on. Like I said, he might even be in Chicago by the time opening night starts because of, waiver stuff. And, we'll see how that goes with Brandon Bussey. But it's going to be Kochekov, Anderson kind of being your 1A and 1B. Who your opening night starter is, that we will know probably getting up closer to game time. But we know those are your 2 goalies. No world changes there. It'll be interesting to see if the Hurricanes go with the on-off swap of these guys like we usually see through the back half of the last couple of seasons where they kind of just swapped every other game. Will they do that this year? It'll be interesting to see if they do that. If not, we could possibly see them riding some hot hands at some point as well. So it'll be very interesting to see how they deploy their goalies throughout the season because Anderson came back on a 1-year deal. We'll see what happens after that. And for Kochekov, this is the second to last year of his 4-year contract. I think this is a year where it's like, okay, can you be that guy for us as our, maybe not one, but as our future 1A goalie? Because I think with all the goalies who are going to be available next offseason, this is a chance for Kochekov to be like, you got to prove yourself and be the 1A. So that way, whoever we get in the offseason is a compliment as your 1B. So that'd be very interesting to see how it works out. But the main thing is, can Freddie stay healthy? Can Kochekov stay healthy as well? And also can the Hurricanes retain Bussey since they lost Primo to waivers? And of course, they might have to do the same thing with him. So only time will tell. But we got open that roster. We know what the lines are probably going to look like in terms of the forwards and the defensive pairings. Only question is who will be the starting goalie on that night. But either way, we got a roster. We're only 2 days away from the start of the regular season. We have finally made it, everyone. It's going to be exciting. I know I'm ready to talk about actual games that matter, so we're not that far away. But this will be the Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. thank you for making your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you want to keep up with me, I'm at OneTrueZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky, the Zachary Martin, where if you click the link tree in my bios, you can find all of my written content at thehockeywriters.com. Make sure to check that out. I've been doing a lot of stuff over there recently, talking about lines, talking about guys who've been claimed off of waivers, stuff like that, opening rosters, so much over there at thehockeywriters.com. Make sure to go check that out. If you want to check my other podcasts, it's the Search Cast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For Locked On Hurricanes, we're on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure to leave a 5-star rating and review, because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, it's Locked On Hurricanes. Subscribe, hit the bell notification so you don't miss a show. Hit the thumbs up to notify the show as well. Share with other Caniacs to become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Tuesday. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.